The Senate decides to try former President Donald Trump for a second time, but with a partisan vote. Where will the division leave the U.S.? And how will it affect Washington's engagement with the world? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm Sami Zeidan. Well, it's taken almost 4 hours of debate in a divided U.S. Senate. Donald Trump's second impeachment is now going ahead, though, after senators found it constitutional. Trump's lawyers argued he could not be tried after leaving the White House. Well, he's now the first former president to face such proceedings. A 56-44 majority voted in favor of continuing the process, including 6 Republicans. Impeachment managers and defense lawyers will present their cases over the next 2 days. A 2/3 majority of the evenly split Senate is needed to convict Trump of inciting insurrection. Democrats accuse him of provoking the January 6th assault on the U.S. Capitol. If convicted, he could be barred from holding office again. His legal team says the charges are politically motivated and would further split a divided nation.
Our case is based on cold, hard facts. People died that day. Officers ended up with head damage and brain damage. People's eyes were gouged. An officer had a heart attack. An officer lost 3 fingers that day. 2 officers have taken their own lives. Senators, this cannot be our future. This cannot be the future of America. We cannot have presidents inciting and mobilizing mob violence against our government and our institutions because they refuse to accept the will of the people under the Constitution of the United States.
But why are the House managers afraid, and why is the majority of the House of Representatives afraid of the American people? I mean, let's understand why we are really here. We are really here because the majority in the House of Representatives does not want to face Donald Trump as a political rival in the future. That's the real reason we're here. And that's why they have to get over the jurisdictional hurdle, which they can't get over. But that's why they have to get over that in order to get to the part of the Constitution that allows removal.
Well, let's have a look at how we got here. On January the 6th, Trump addressed supporters in Washington, D.C., saying the election was stolen and urged them to march on Congress. Then Trump supporters stormed the Capitol building as politicians were confirming Joe Biden's election win. Proceedings were suspended, some politicians evacuated, while others hid. That violence left 5 people dead. Democrats opened impeachment proceedings in the House of Representatives. 10 Republicans broke ranks to vote with them to impeach Donald Trump. Senators then agreed to delay the trial until Biden was sworn in as president. On January the 25th, the impeachment article was delivered to the Senate. Let's bring in our guests into the show. We have joining us from Washington, D.C., Jack Kingston. He's a former U.S. Republican congressman. In Burlington, Kesha, a Vermont state senator. And in Milford, Connecticut, Chris Haynes, an associate professor of political science and legal studies at the University of New Haven. Welcome to you all. Good to have you on the show. Let's start, if we could, with Chris. Has anything that has happened in the Senate so far changed at all the prospects of impeachment and where we are ultimately heading with this process? What do you think, Chris?
I mean, you got to think by the fact that only one Republican senator, Senator Cassidy, changed his vote, that nothing seismically has changed with respect to the group of Republicans that could vote to convict President Trump. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it doesn't look like anything has changed. That said, the way, the precision, the emotion, the impact of the Democratic managers' presentation, their video, and the contrast with the case put forth by the Trump lawyers was so stark that, you know, it could have changed some public opinion, and which could pressure some of those Republicans at some point into maybe reconsidering their vote. But at the end of the day, I don't think anything's changed.
All right, Jack, how much of a real possibility is that the strength of the argument of the impeachment managers, the alleged weakness in the presentation of the president's defense narrative, that might offer some pressure on senators to change their stance?
You know, I don't know if it will really make any difference or not. Most people know this is political theater. It's a kangaroo court. There's no court in the land, for example, where a member of the jury who would vote, Patrick Leahy, would also serve as the judge of the court right off the bat. That shows you what a sham it is. The video that Chris mentioned was spliced. It would not be admitted as evidence in a traffic court in the United States of America. So I'm actually hoping some of the Democrats will come to their senses and say, you know, we don't have the votes to convict. It takes 67 votes. There's no chance that that's going to happen. Maybe the Republicans should go back and impeach President Obama when we regain the majority. Maybe we go back after Clinton, because that could be lower hanging fruit. But this is political theater. Most people know it. It really is such a sad moment for Joe Biden, who 3 weeks ago, sworn in as president, talked about unifying the country, and he's sitting silently because he dare not speak out in violation of the beliefs of the radical extremes of the Democrat Party these days, that he doesn't show any leadership. I mean, he's not weighing in at all and saying, guys, here's a president that's out of office.
All right, so basically, Jack, I think if I can paraphrase what you're saying correctly is, no, this is not going to put pressure on Republicans to switch side. If anything, it might do the opposite and make Democrats, as you said, come to their senses. Kesha, do you agree with that analysis of where what we've seen in the Senate, where that's leading public opinion or public pressure?
Well, absolutely not. I mean, first of all, I don't want to unify with people who brought Molotov cocktails to the Capitol or planted bombs under some of our revered buildings and institutions. You know, we're looking at a situation where we need justice. We need to be able to reckon with what happened on January 6th as a country. And sometimes I will go back and watch Congresswoman Barbara Jordan's speech during the impeachment trials of Richard Nixon. And, you know, at that time, President Nixon was good enough and had enough remorse to resign. And we did not see any remorse from Donald Trump for what he incited and the violence he caused for a police officer dying. And as we heard, you know, other injuries and people taking their own lives. This was a dark day in American history. And this debate is for 50 years from now, 100 years from now, for all of us to make sure that future generations know we stood up on the right side of justice. That's what this is about. We are very proud.
Okay, but Kesha, do you think that's whose narrative is going to win over either side of the political aisle? Do you really see that this is going to end in an impeachment?
You know, I think I want to focus on the Republicans who have been brave enough to put their country before their party. And that may not be enough Republicans to impeach this former president, but that is enough for us to know that there is guilt there. And Senator Patrick Leahy is unimpeachable in his character. Many folks know he's served with distinction for decades. He has respect on all sides of the aisle. He has worked tirelessly to uphold the Constitution, and I believe he will lead a process that goes down in the history books as one to reconcile what happened and make sure we still have a democracy at the end of this process.
Chris, what does it say about the state of division, not only around political issues, but the state of division on what should be really consensus issues like constitutional principles? of whether all the Senate has been looking at so far was the question of whether it has the constitutional right to try a former president, right? And that even that constitutional question went down on party lines. Is that worrying, Chris?
I mean, what it says is that, well, ultimately, I want to address something that Jack said, which is this is ultimately a political process. So the fact that it's political is not surprising, and it's not necessarily bad. The difference is, you know, congressmen back during the Nixon impeachment, they were actually congressmen that you think that actually were much more fair and saw facts as facts. It's very different now. Much more polarized. It also speaks to the polarized nature between the two different parties and America. And it also specifically means that, you know, one of those parties still has not moved on from its last president, and President Donald Trump is still in control of that party. And so, if anything, those are the things that it says.
I'm going to go out on a leg here and say that might be the one thing everyone on this show might agree with. And let me test my hypothesis now. I'll come to Jack in a minute, but Kesha, just very briefly, is the result so far of the Senate process a more polarized America, which is what Chris is saying? Do you agree with that?
The Democrats have the slimmest majority in the Senate, but they represent millions and millions more Americans in their population. So, you know, what we've seen is a real imbalance between who's representing us in Washington and what the American people feel is right.
So is your answer no? Because I've got some poll. Careful what you answer, Kesha. We've got some poll numbers to bring up. So are you saying no? You don't think that the American public is getting more polarized as a result of this impeachment process?
Oh, more polarized, you know, perhaps, but I do believe the majority of Americans want to see justice in this situation and want to see a reckoning. If I am wrong, you know, I am starting to not recognize the entire country, and it could be because I'm in Vermont, where we have a Republican governor who also believes that, you know, Donald Trump is on the wrong side of history and wanted to see him gone a long time ago.
Okay, all right. Let me give Jack a chance in there. So let me ask you, just to bring it back to the same question. Are we seeing a more polarized America as a result of, well, how it's going so far in the Senate?
Of course we are. Let me say this about my good colleague here. There's no court in Vermont that would have a member of the jury be the judge of the court. This is a kangaroo court. Everybody knows that. There's no court in Vermont that would allow a spliced video to be admitted as evidence. As Chris said, this is a political proceeding. It's
Jack,
not.
I'm sorry.
Really
let me interrupt you now and say, but when you say things like that, are you not in fact feeding, if not creating, the division? Because you're basically undermining the process of the Senate.
There is absolute division. As somebody might, let me paraphrase an old saying, don't spit on my leg and call it rain. If you're serious, you would have due process. You would have a witness. You would have a Supreme Court judge sitting in. You would have Democrats who would actually break from party ranks, quite unheard of in the Democrat Party these days, and say, wait a minute, are we really going to unify the country by impeaching somebody who's out of office? Oh, and by the way, the purpose of impeachment is to remove somebody from office. So why are we doing this? The truth of the matter is the Democrat Party fear Donald Trump almost as much as they hate him, and they hate him as almost a religion. And they want to make sure that he is not a threat to them by running again in 2024. That's what this is all about, and everybody in the Senate knows that. 100 members of the Senate would tell you that if they would speak truthfully. This is nothing but a kangaroo political court for one purpose, and that is to get Donald Trump and to give comfort to the Democrat extremists who can't get over their hatred of it.
All right, we're going to come back to the some of the terms you've used there of kangaroo court, but I did mention that we've got some polls, so let's take a look at what Americans, how they view this trial. A Gallup poll found 52% would like to see senators voting to convict Donald Trump. 45% prefer senators to find him not guilty, and 3% are unsure. Well, this suggests the public is slightly more supportive of convicting Trump compared to last year's trial, but the poll does suggest Americans are almost evenly split on the issue of impeachment. Now, I mean, let me take this point perhaps to Chris. I mean, this, when you look at this poll, it's almost 50-50 split, right? And with this kind of trend, how does this end with the sort of agenda that Joe Biden spoke about of a more unified country? It doesn't seem to be going that way, right?
I mean, the reality is I'm not sure it's gonna end. You got to have both parties being willing to play ball here, and they're not. We need civil politics again. I think Joe Biden is trying to bring that back, but there are people in his party and people in the opposition that are too vested in the current system, which is really built on media appearances and ginning up votes and polarizing America. That poll is a reflection of the polarization of America. It looks like the presidential vote
Chris,
in 2020.
Where does that, I think it was 42%, that is opposed. Where basically does the coalition of, can we call them, I don't know, nationalists, different types of nationalists and nationalist groups that rallied around Trump, where do they go from here? If they think this is, as Jack was saying, this is a kangaroo court, that there is a lack of legitimacy in the process, do they stay, some of them, within the Republican Party, or do they break away?
I think a lot of this depends on what Donald Trump does and says, right? Does he create his own party? Does he create his own media network? Does he not do anything? If Donald Trump is no longer really active in the party, I don't think they vote anymore, most of them. But if he is, and all indications are that Donald Trump wants to play a role in the next the continuing Republican Party, then I'm sure they're going to be there. They're going to be the base of that party. And we're going to see this kind of division and fear in the eyes of many elected Republican office holders moving forward.
Jack, let me come back to you. When you use the language like this is a kangaroo court, aren't you, one of the effects of that is to delegitimize some of the institutions of democracy? Can you blame people then who might not only go out of the Republican Party, but out of the whole democratic system? I mean, one of the tweets, I think was the Proud Boys, was calling on their followers to now go dark, and perhaps engage in more violence rather than trying to resolve differences democratically.
Well, I think in terms of, where do we go from here? I think that if this process was a fair and open process, again, with a real judge, again, with real witnesses, again, with real evidence, again, with due process, which is a fundamental right of Americans. And albeit impeachment can be exempt from all that, Americans still expect it. That's what Richard Nixon had, for example. And I think part of this is if you're going to say the rhetoric used by Donald Trump is somehow different from that was used by Nancy Pelosi, where she called defenders of the federal courthouse in Portland stormtroopers, different from Maxine Waters, who said find the members of the Trump cabinet and disrupt them, get in their face, or different from the language from Chuck Schumer, who on the steps of the Supreme Court said, you hear me, Kavanaugh, you hear me, Gorsuch, the whirlwind is coming for you. I mean, an absolute threat to the extent that the Supreme Justice Roberts had to comment on it publicly. I think if Americans see that the
Does that make it better, though, Jack? Does that make it okay? I mean, if the accusation is, well, the other side is using inflammatory rhetoric that delegitimizes the institutions of democracy, is it a good recipe for both sides to do that?
Yes, absolutely. Both sides have to do that. And that is where I was going with this whole thing. If you would see the Democrats discipline in their own, you would see the Republicans probably discipline in their own as well. It would make a big difference. But you're not seeing that. All you're seeing is I wear a red jersey, I wear a blue jersey. We're on different sides. We have to always be against each other.
All right,
let
me take that point to Kesha then. Kesha, would you agree then that the inflammatory rhetoric is something that the Democrats, maybe now that they have the White House and both houses of Congress, need to take the initiative to combat? And as Jack said, if the Dems do it, we do it.
Well, I will just say, as the youngest woman in history to serve in the Vermont State Senate, young people are incredibly tired of not having any adults in the room in Washington and having people on both sides lowering the level of debate. I do not see that from President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. And we should be holding our president and those in the White House to a higher standard than we hold other office holders. We have not been able to do that with Donald Trump. We know he's perfectly comfortable in courts. He's there all the time, but he is not comfortable hearing his words repeated back to him. He constantly denies what he has said. He constantly tries to evade responsibility. He did it after inciting that riot, after saying he would be there to march with his followers, and then absolutely denying his role in that attack. That is cowardly, and we don't suffer cowards in this country. We need to be able to hold him accountable to what he has said, or we don't have a functioning democracy and a functioning society where we hold people accountable.
Okay, I want to maybe shift the discussion a little bit now. Chris, the issue of a distraction, will this turn into really, although both sides seem that they want the impeachment at least to be a quick process, are we really going to see the machinery of government distracted, if not with impeachment, but with the divisiveness of it for the rest of this term?
Well, what you see right now is Joe Biden doing everything in his power to try to stay out of it so that that possibly doesn't happen. Whether that happens or not, I'm not sure. And to be frank here, the polarization was already there. I'm not sure the polarization is going to get that much worse. But it could definitely derail a lot of the efforts that Joe Biden wants to do legislatively that require Republican votes, unless they're willing to do away with the filibuster, which 2 Democratic senators have said they're not. So it's going to be difficult for him to kind of move forward. But indications so far, are that there are some Republicans that are willing to at least sit down and talk with Biden. That's a start. That's much better than what Obama had to deal with. And so, I guess that's the measure.
Jack, we have an international audience for this show, obviously, and I'm wondering what you would say to address the question of whether we are now looking at a U.S. which is increasingly on a trajectory of being more inward-looking.
Well, the U.S. is going to remain involved in global affairs. It's in our economic interest. It's in our national security interest. People might not like the style of one administration over the other, but we've always been there, and we're going to continue to. I hope, for example, that Joe Biden builds on the peace accords that Donald Trump had signed with Jordan and Israel and other countries. I think it would be a great place to start. I think we should cooperate on energy and not necessarily empower Iran on the nuclear pathway the way many of us fear that there are. Lots of room for compromise on that. I think in terms of China and the potential adventurism that China has around the globe, some of it in terms of stealing business copyrights and so forth, there could be a lot of international cooperation on that. Certainly, terrorism is something that we should all be united on. So I'm optimistic.
Let me jump in here. I think we've got about 60 seconds left. I want to give it to Kesha. On that same thought, with the U.S. caught between impeachment, COVID-19, the economy, do politicians have the mental space and energy to cooperate across the aisle and look at things from China to Russia to Iran and other issues?
Well, I just want to say that having this trial is important to the world. What we're seeing in Myanmar, what we're seeing in countries that are starting to think they can ignore elections too, and they can let their budding democracies die on the vine. It matters what we do in this case. It matters that we honor the results of a free and fair election in this country, and it matters to the world.
All right, thank you all. I think you've all made really good points and passionate cases there for your perspectives. Thank you all for coming on this show. Thanks to Jack Kingston, Kesha Ram, and Chris Haynes. And thank you too for watching the show. You can see it again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. For further discussion, head over to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Sami Zeidan, and the whole team here, for now, is goodbye.